Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the What If. Chapter 1. Minato Namikaze sat in his office, practically pulling out his hair. The greatest of the 9 Biju was getting closer to Konoha with every second, Shinobi dying to stall it, and he sat here without a solution how to stop it. The only thing he found out was that it was impossible to kill a Biju. There had been millions of tries, but not a single success. Sealing was possible, and ironically, it was his own specialty, but sealing a Biju got exponentially harder the higher up the hierarchy it was, and the Kyuubi stood at the very top. There had been a few notes about Jinchuriki and Biju, but the only thing he got on the Kyuubi was that it had never been sealed before and that it was female. Thank you very much, asshole. Knowing the gender really helps in getting rid of it. What was he supposed to do? Offer free sweets, shoes and clothing if it left? Then he found something in the forbidden section. It was a ritual that summoned the Shinigami himself, who then ripped the soul out of your enemy, marking you and devouring both your and the enemy's souls. A last-ditch effort, but what was the point in marking the user if he died along with his victim? Unless it was a sealing. Minato delved into his research with new vigor, and after confirming that it was indeed a sealing ceremony, he started to make adjustments. Since it was a sealing, it should be possible to control where exactly the target was to be sealed. He knew that if he sealed the Kyuubi into an object, it wouldn't take a week and the beast was free once more, being far too strong to be locked in a teapot like the Shukaku. If an animal was used, the Kyuubi would take control before you could say, "Oh shit," since no animal had the willpower or mentality required to keep it at bay. The only possibility was a human. Ideally, he would seal it in himself, then drag them both to hell, but he wasn't sure if the Kyuubi had a trick that would allow it to escape the Shinigami's clutches. Any other adult was out too, seeing that an adult's, even a child's chakra network was already too solidified to handle the sudden influx of chakra. The only thing that could adapt was an infant. Minato felt a new height of despair. He would not have hesitated for a second to sacrifice his own life, but to drag an innocent life into this. Especially since he knew that only 2 babies would be born in time for the sealing, his own. Kushina was pregnant with twins and her water had broke a few minutes ago. He was going to have a son and a daughter, and he would have to seal the Kyuubi in one of them. Even if another mother gave birth early, Minato knew that he couldn't ask anyone to give up their child if he was not willing to give up his. So the only bitter question was which one to seal it in. He weighed his options and eventually came to the conclusion that sealing it in his daughter would be the best option. Sealing a being of one sex into a being of the other sex was always risky, as it kept host and prisoner from properly bonding, something Kumo had learned when they sealed the Nibi into a man, who during his life not only had little contact with his Biju and never got beyond using a bit of raw chakra that was useless for any kind of jutsu, but had miserable chakra control altogether, as the different chakras violently disrupted each other. On the 40th anniversary of the sealing, the man had spontaneously combusted, the explosion taking out almost a tenth of Kumo, the suddenly free Nibi smashing another fifth before it was caught and resealed, this time into a girl. No, it was better to seal a female into another female. The Nibi had destroyed a tenth of Kumo. Minato had no interest in finding out how big of a boom the Kyuubi would make. He spent the next 3 hours designing the seal that would hold the Kyuubi, before heading to Kushina, his heart heavy. Kushina held her babies in her arms, smiling at both of them. Naruto looked just like his father, while Natsuki was her spitting image. They were crying, and honestly she couldn't blame them, as she could feel the Kyuubi's chakra, the beast most likely approaching the gates at this moment. "Shish, it's okay. Don't worry, Daddy will find a way to save the day, that's what your daddy does best." Naruto, Natsuki, it'll be fine. Tsunade, who had returned to Konoha to help her friend Kushina through what has been called the most painful time in a woman's life, was not so sure, and she could see that Kushina's confidence in her husband was not absolute either. Speak of the devil, there he came, with an expression appropriate for a funeral. This did not look good. Minato looked at his wife, knowing this would be the last time he'd ever see her. He forced himself to smile. "Hello Kushina, how are you doing? Are the children all right?" Kushina gave him a weak smile. "Natsuki and Naruto are just fine, and according to Tsunade, I'm out of the woods. What about you? Did you find something? Minato nodded. I researched, and found out that while it's impossible to destroy the Kyuubi, I can seal it away. I know the jutsu and I've already designed the array. Kushina smiled, relieved. That's wonderful, darling. Why do you look so down? Minato wished he could keep quiet, but he knew that would not only betraying Kushina, but that it simply wouldn't work. Still, how do you tell your wife that you will die sealing a monster into her child? Well, Tsunade looked at him. There's a catch, isn't there? She had always been sharp, and as a medic, reading people was child's play. Yes, there are two. Kushina looked at him. What are they? Minato gulped. For the sealing to work, I need to sacrifice my life. Kushina's eyes widened. No, she whispered. Tell me it's not true. Minato glanced at her. I can't. To seal the Kyuubi, I need to summon the Shinigami. Kushina sobbed. It's not fair. After all we've been through, after all we've lost, after the war, now that we finally came this far, it just ends like this. Now that we finally have children, they will never know their father. It's just not fair. Tsunade looked at him, her eyes sympathizing, yet sharp. Was that the other catch? Minato couldn't look her or Kushina in the eyes. No, he finally whispered, his voice sounding as if he had fought down a sob. Kushina was not really paying attention. After this news, what could be worse? Tsunade asked. What is? Minato stared at the floor, his voice trembling. The only thing that can hold, that could hope to keep the Kyuubi at bay, is. He paused, having to gather all his strength not to break down in tears, is an infant. Kushina stared at him, wide-eyed. Then she pulled her children closer to her chest. No, she stated, her panicked voice steadily increasing in volume. No, you can't, not them. No, I won't let you, not our children, no. Minato slammed his fist into the wall, tears now running down his face as well. Do you think I want to do this? He shouted, before taking a deep breath. Kushina, I've looked through every possible source. I've searched everywhere. If I seal the fox in an object, the object will break. If I seal it in an animal, the fox will take over. If I try to take it down with me, it may escape me, as it and I would have no time for our souls to connect, so I'd have no hold. And nobody with set chakra coils could possibly survive the sealing. There is nobody else. Kushina. He grew quiet, small sobs escaping his lips. There is nobody else. Tsunade hesitantly patted his back. This once again showed her that the title of Hokage was more of a burden and a curse than anything else. Here stood a man, a loving husband and fresh father, who had to not only sacrifice his life in his best years, but damn his own child to house a demon. The job sucked, and that was it. After nearly an hour, Minato left the room with Natsuki in a broken heart. He knew that he had to do it, but that didn't make him feel any better about it. If anything, it made him feel worse. Minato stood on Gamabunta's head, staring at the fox who destroyed his happiness. He sighed. You ready, Gamabunta? The large toad snorted humorlessly. Nobody is ever ready to face that one, but I'll buy you as much time as I can. Thanks. Tell Jiraiya to get you a large bottle of sake, my treat. Minato stated. The toad nodded. Well then, let's go. With that, the toad charged the possibly most dangerous beast on the planet, using his sword to deflect a tail. His entire tactic was based on, hop around, slash it when you see an opening, don't get hit. So far, it was working. Minato had already drawn the seals on his daughter's stomach, and was flashing trough the last hand signs as Gamabunta took a hit, not enough to dispel him, but it would leave a scar over his eye. Hurry, I can't keep her busy much longer. The toad called. But Minato had already finished, the Shinigami was floating behind him. He looked at the fox and calmly spoke the words that would end his life. Shiki Fuin. He felt like his chest was encased in ice as the Shinigami's arm shot out of his stomach, grabbing the Kyuubi, desperately struggling while Gamabunta kept it from escaping before disappearing with a poof, and somehow transforming it into red mist that it placed in Natsuki's stomach. The seal Minato had inscribed glowed, before fading away. It was over. Minato slowly turned around and looked at the Shinigami, who was also looking down to him. Are you prepared? The deity asked. Minato opened his mouth. Images began to flash before his eyes. His village, his wife, his son, his daughter. The images changed. He saw his hopes for the future. First he saw his village, glistering proudly in the sunlight. He saw Kushina smiling at him in front of their compound. He saw his children growing up, first as children, then young teens. He saw himself and Kushina giving them advice on the shinobi life. He saw them, now older, at their weddings. He saw himself hand the Hokage hat to his children. He saw his grandchildren sit on his lap while he told stories of long-past wars. He finally saw himself, now as old as Sarutobi, laying in a bed, surrounded by his precious people, peacefully closing his eyes. Unlike many shinobi, Minato's ideal death had never been to die in a brilliant display, fighting a equal if not superior foe like the Shodaime, or facing unbeatable odds to buy his comrades time like the Nadaime. He wouldn't mind going that way, mind you, but his dream had always been to die peacefully of old age with a smile, surrounded by his loved ones. It wasn't fair, to have everything stolen from him, just when life had finally started to look up. He could stay tough, but facing a god, Minato, knowing it would make no difference, chose honesty. I'm not ready. This statement, while seemingly so easy to make, was the hardest thing Minato had ever done, including choosing to use his children. He gave up his ego, his pride, his image as the fearless, confident leader and revealed his true self. A man who was afraid to die with so much left undone. Where was his courage, his resolve to offer his life as the Hokage? The iron will and passionate love for his village that made him running into more than one hopeless situation with guaranteed death. Where was that passion that had driven him in the library to search for a solution, no matter the cost to himself? Gone. Vanished under the cold gaze of a god that stripped all falseness, that could not be deceived. The Shinigami looked at him, his inhuman face betraying no emotion. Then, very well. Minato blinked. It couldn't really be that easy, could it? What? The deity looked at him. I am death. Everything dies. It makes no difference if I take you now or in 100 years. Eventually, you will die, and as our pact, your soul will be mine. I am patient. I can wait. With that, he vanished, leaving a baffled, slack-jawed Minato behind. Minato then looked at his daughter, and smiled. The Shinigami would eventually get his soul. And, he didn't care. He was given a chance to watch his children grow up, that was all he needed. He picked up Natsuki and headed towards the hospital. He would take care of the villagers in a minute. Right now, he headed for his family. The reunion had been shocking and heartwarming, lasting nearly an hour before Minato decided he couldn't leave his villagers in the dark any longer. He took his daughter in his arms and smiled. She looked exactly like her mother, with the exception of the 6 whisker marks on her cheeks. Naruto on the other hand was clearly his clone, or rather his reflection in the fountain of youth. He stood on the tower, looking down on the masses gathering below, cheering for his victory. He smiled. People of Konoha, we have won. Thanks to our many brave shinobi, I have managed to find a way to defeat the Kyuubi. It will no longer be a scourge on these lands. The roars were deafening. Minato raised his voice. But not I alone am the true hero. The heroes are all those who bravely faced the Kyuubi. Roaring approval. Then Minato spoke again. Nor am I the savior of Konoha. The true savior is right here. He lifted Natsuki up, so that everyone could see her. The Kyuubi was so powerful because it is immortal, and nothing can kill it. However, this girl is keeping it locked away where it can never cause harm again. She is the jailer for the most powerful Biju, and she will make sure that we can live without fear. I present you the savior of Konoha, my daughter Natsuki Uzumaki Namikaze. There was a moment of silence, then the applause and cheering rose to new highs. Their beloved leader, the Yondaime had stated that the girl, his daughter no less, was a hero who kept Kyuubi imprisoned forever, so it had to be true. The few yelling something about killing were swiftly pulled into dark corners, where the truth was beaten into their heads. Minato felt wonderful. His family was complete, he was alive and his daughter was seen as the hero that she was. And for a moment he had been worried that they would be unable to tell the difference between the jailer and the prisoner. He should never have doubted his people. And even though revealing both his marriage and status as a parent may be slightly risky, Minato was not worried. He had stared both Kyuubi and the Shinigami himself in the face and had somehow managed to make it out. What human did he have to fear? Iwa and Kumo would be too worried that if they attacked the children, their parents would retaliate and bring repeats of the humiliating defeats the war had brought them and their countries. In fact, it was more likely that new alliances would sprout like mushrooms. He would have to deflect the proposals to his children, but somehow, that didn't really seem all that threatening compared to what he had been through. No, the future of his family was very bright. It's fascinating how a man can at the same time be so right and yet so wrong. Chapter 2. Kushina looked at the two babies that were peacefully sleeping, finally. They were incredibly tiring. As much as she loved those two, her husband was currently busy organizing the rebuilding of Konoha, so looking after the kids fell completely to her. She was thanking God that at least Naruto was a quiet child who only cried when he really needed something, as Natsuki was a bundle of energy that couldn't be let unsupervised for even a single second. She permanently crawled around, never remaining in the same spot, and she cried more often in 10 minutes than Naruto did in a normal week. Kushina suspected the Kyuubi was at least partially responsible for the exhausting amounts of energy Natsuki possessed. Still, her life was going well. She had survived giving birth, her husband had survived something nobody was supposed to survive, and their children were healthy. What more could a mother ask for? Well, maybe that he children got along a little better. They were 8 months old, and seemed to get along fairly well, although Natsuki was clearly the more dominant one of the two, except for the odd night. It had happened twice so far that she had woken up to Naruto's whimpering, only to find that the only thing out of the ordinary was that Natsuki was clutching onto him. She had thought it cute, but Naruto seemed really uncomfortable. Maybe Natsuki was grabbing too hard. Naruto was just over 4 years old when he first understood that there was a difference between him and his sister. Of course there were differences. He was a boy and she was a girl. They had different likes and dislikes, liked to play with different toys, stuff like that. But while Natsuki had never been sick a day in her life, his health was a bit more frail. And beside getting sick from time to time, Naruto had noticed that 3 to 4 times he woke up feeling absolutely miserable without knowing why, in the last year. It usually only lasted a few days, but it was still odd. Their father had of course explained that Natsuki had the mighty Kyuubi sealed inside of her, and that it gave her increased healing and better health. That made it all the more puzzling for Naruto why Natsuki screamed as if tortured whenever she scraped her knee. Naruto usually tried not to cry when it happened to him, and just went to his parents, most of the time mommy, something she seemed happy about, since she always called him a big boy. But only now, that they had left the compound together as a family for the first time did Naruto really understand that there was a large difference between him and his sister. Now that Naruto thought about it, as long as he could remember, he and Natsuki had never been out of the compound at the same time. So when he had been outside before, people had smiled at him, and he had thought they'd do the same for his sister, and he was right. What he didn't expect was that they completely overlooked him while his sister was there. Nobody seemed to notice he existed anymore, as everyone rushed to get a look at his sister. Naruto didn't really mind not being gawked at by strangers, and actually had a bit of sympathy for his sister that was caught in the center of this human maelstrom, until someone, in his hurry to get a look at the savior of Konoha, ran into him, actually sending him flying with a surprised shout. The muddy ground prevented any serious injuries, but his formerly orange yukata now had large patches of brown. He sniffed. He had liked that yukata. Minato noticed that the tug on his leg had vanished, and looked down, only to find that Naruto was not there, but a good 4 feet away, rubbing his head while unhappily looking at his ruined yukata. He saw the man that had run him down, his shinobi instincts having ensured that he recalled the face of a man who had rushed by him a little too close. He spotted said civilian merchant, elbowing his way through the crowd, and pulled him back by the collar. "Hey, what's the big? Oh, Hokage-sama, what can I do for you?" The merchant had turned ashen when he realized he'd shouted at the leader of his village. Minato was annoyed. "Well, for one thing, you can apologize for knocking my son into the dirt and pay for the cleaning of his yukata." The merchant's eyes darted around until he saw Naruto, covered in dirt. Lord in heaven, he had ran the son of the Yondaime over. He wouldn't be able to sell a thing for the next week. "I'm sorry, I was elsewhere with my thoughts. Of course I will take responsibility for this, the cleaning is on me. If there is anything else I can do." Minato gave him a cold look, and the merchant shrank away. You will get the bill in the next days. And that was an expensive yukata. If the stains don't go out, you're replacing it. Of course the talk between the Hokage and the merchant had attracted attention, and Kushina and Natsuki now noticed Naruto was still sitting in the dirt. Natsuki blinked, pointed at her brother, and laughed. It wasn't really any bad intention, he just looked so funny. Naruto stared at his sister, then at his own clothing, and even though he didn't think it was that funny, he had to laugh too. Kushina shook her head, shooed her children back to the compound to get changed while Minato headed to a bakery to get something sweet that his family could eat together, to cheer up his son after that unfortunate event. A few months later, the family sat together at dinner. Kushina cooked the family's favorite meal, ramen. Natsuki gobbled down the ramen faster than one could blink, while Minato and Kushina, while eating more civilized, were only slightly slower in their decimation of the meal. Only Naruto ate slower, savoring each bite before swallowing it. That was also the reason he had just finished his first bowl, while all others were at least on bowl 4. Mom, can I please have a? Naruto started, only to be interrupted by Natsuki. Mom, refill, she shouted happily. Kushina sighed. Young lady, how many times do I have to tell you not to shout? Still, she took the pot and poured more into Natsuki's bowl, before looking into the pot with a frown on her face. Well, that was the last of it. Naruto blinked. It wasn't fair. He loved ramen just as much as anybody else in his family did. Natsuki was eating her undeserved 9th filling. He had just finished his first, and she got the last bowl. Whenever Naruto interrupted somebody, his mother told him that that was rude. Why was it okay for his sister? Naruto calmed himself. It was to be expected. Naruto was unusually smart for his age, and he had already noticed that his parents seemed to love Natsuki a little more than they loved him. He wasn't beaten or hated, it was just subtle things that gave it away. They just always cared a little more for Natsuki than for him. He knew that parents sometimes had favorites amongst their children, and that Natsuki was important because she carried the Kyuubi, but couldn't at least one of his parents love him more? Kushina looked at him. What were you saying, Naruto? Naruto blinked. Nothing. He stood up, pushed his chair in, placed his bowl in the sink, and left. Kushina looked at Minato, who gave her a helpless shrug. Natsuki was busy with her bowl, ignorant to the rest of the world. Naruto opened his eyes, and immediately felt miserable. The glance down was just a formality for him to know that Natsuki had sneaked into his bed during the storm last night. So he probably had a few hours before it got really bad. Then he noticed the door to his room was open, and his parents were looking at them, doubtlessly finding it incredibly cute. Fortunately Natsuki woke up, saw her parents, and rushed out of the room. Naruto looked at his mother. Mom, can't you tell her to stop it? His mother blinked. Why? It's cute, and I like seeing that my children care for each other this much. Most children climb into their parents' bed when they're scared, not their brothers. I'm almost jealous. Quote. Naruto grimaced. You shouldn't be, Mom, it hurts. Every time she sleeps here, I wake up feeling awful. Kushina frowned. He always said that, and there was nothing wrong with him. She had even gone to a doctor the first times he claimed it hurt, and the man had told her that nothing was wrong, aside from a cold. You know, I can understand that you think it makes you look less manly sleeping with your sister, but that's no reason to make up stories. As punishment for telling lies, you'll weed the garden. She knew it wasn't that much of a punishment, as Naruto enjoyed working in the garden. Naruto opened his mouth in protest. But Mom. Kushina stopped him before he could say more. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, I suggest you be quiet before you make your punishment worse than it has to be. Naruto closed his mouth, got dressed and marched towards the garden, past a smug-looking Natsuki. The storm had not completely passed, and Naruto spent the last quarter of his time in the garden soaking in icy cold rain, determined to finish the task, no matter how unfair it was to be punished for telling the truth. He spent the next days in bed with a high fever. It was Naruto's and Natsuki's 5th birthday. Normally they visited all the different clans that day, spending time and getting presents with each one before moving on, taking the children and those adults who wanted with them until they finally reached the festival that was held annually to celebrate the defeat of Kyuubi. At midnight they launched fireworks that lasted over an hour, with all children being excused from school the next day so that they could watch them. But because Naruto had just recovered from a heavy fever, Kushina and Minato decided that it might be better if they asked the guests to come to their house instead, so that Naruto would only travel to the festival and back, to not completely exhaust himself. Naruto smiled happily as he took congratulations from all sides, and even got to cut the cake. He gave his sister an extra large piece with 3 strawberries on top, as it was her favorite kind of cake, although the congratulating masses didn't leave any time for the twins to actually exchange words. Naruto opened his pile of presents, being happy for each one and not at all jealous of his sister. He knew that his sister would get more presents than him, as everyone in the village seemed to want to send her a present. He was happy with what he got. From his father a blunt set of kunai and shuriken next to a big bag of sweets, while his mother gave him a shiny wooden sword for training, as they would start with shinobi training after their birthday, which really was the biggest present he could ask for, well, aside from the free meal coupon Ichiraku's ramen had sent him. Natsuki got the same gifts, plus a few more, and was loudly cheering in happiness. After the gifting and the meal, it was decided that Minato would activate the security seals to keep uninvited guests out and over-enthusiastic kids in, before the 2 age groups separated. The adults stayed in the house, talking boring grown-up talks, while the children got to play in the yard and training grounds, after they had made sure there were no forgotten pointy things laying around. It was a warm, sunny day, so the children were only too happy to oblige. After the adults had left, Natsuki suddenly clapped her hands, pulling the attention to her. "I just wanted to say something. Thanks for coming." The children cheered, but Natsuki wasn't done. Wait, the second thing is, because Naru-ni said something mean about me, I'm not going to play with anyone who plays with him." Silence reigned after that declaration. The children looked at each other. Natsuki was definitely the more fun one of the two, always cheery and filled with energy, unlike her rather quiet brother, so the decision with whom of the two they wanted to play was an easy one. Also, most of their parents had told them how important Natsuki was and that being friends with her was a good thing. Slowly, all the children headed over to Natsuki, some having the decency to give him apologetic looks, although the general opinion was that Naruto deserved what he got if he was being mean, leaving Naruto standing alone, gaping like a fish. He could not believe his sister had just done that. He knew she wasn't happy that he said that her crawling into his bed hurt him, but it was true. The next 2-3 hours, Naruto made multiple attempts to play with the other kids, but they sent him away. He tried to talk to Natsuki, but his sister ignored him completely. Eventually, Naruto just gave up, sitting alone in front of the small, shallow pond on the grounds, flipping rocks over its surface. When the parents came to take their kids to the festival, Naruto said he was tired and didn't want to go. His parents assumed that it was because of his fever and allowed him to go to bed, leaving him some medicine and tea he later poured down the drain, while the rest of the children headed off to the festival, Natsuki being the only one who felt a slight twinge of guilt from her brother's absence, before the festival washed those thoughts away. She spent the evening at different stalls playing games and winning toys with her friends, falling asleep at the end of the fireworks and being carried home. Naruto had long since cried himself to sleep at that point. A few weeks later, Naruto was sitting in the living room, drawing a picture. He wasn't really good at it, but he had decided to just try it. With his parents gone and Natsuki being nowhere to be found, he didn't have anything better to do, and discovered he liked drawing just as much as gardening. His first picture was simple. It was a picture of his family. Him to the very right, holding his father's hand, who was holding Mom in his other hand, who in turn was holding Natsuki's hand. He had worked on it for the last 2 hours, and it was finally done. The resemblance was very crude, but it was there, and Naruto was proud that he had also thought of drawing grass, the sky, and a house looking like their home, only without the surrounding wall. He was about to put the drawing stuff away, when he heard a hissing. He left the house to investigate, and found that a cat had apparently sneaked in. It was a tiger-striped cat with a ribbon on one ear. Naruto tilted his head. "Come on, kitty, I'm not gonna hurt you. You're not supposed to be here, I'll show you the way out." The cat hissed at him, but it followed, ready to pounce or flee at the slightest indication of deceit. Naruto, however, simply opened the small hatch that could be used to look at who's at the door before actually opening it. It had seals on it that prevented anything from going into the property, but it didn't have anything preventing going out of the property, as long as it fitted. The cat jumped on his back when he leaned forward, then on his shoulder before jumping through the hatch and out of the compound it had been unable to leave. Naruto on the other hand heard his parents' voices and realized they must have come back while he had been busy with the cat. When he came in, his father smiled at him. "Ah Naruto, nice to see you. How was your day?" Naruto smiled shyly. Because of Minato's duties as Hokage, he didn't get to spend as much time with his family as he would have liked, so Naruto always seemed a bit unsure about him. "I'm fine." Then his mother showed up, smiling. "Naruto, Natsuki drew a great picture." Naruto blinked. She too. Well, that would explain why Naruto hadn't found her. "Really?" Kushina nodded. "Here it is." She showed it. Minato smiled. "That's impressive. It really looks just like us." Naruto's jaw had dropped. That was his picture. The one he had spent the whole day drawing. Natsuki had taken it while Naruto was busy with the cat, and in her shaky writing, had named it hers, writing ME in the uncolored spot Naruto had left above her head. Kushina was titled Mom, Minato with Dad, while she had written Naruni above his image. "I made that." Kushina's smile faded. "Naruto, I told you before that it's not nice to lie." "But I'm not lying." Naruto defended himself. Kushina gave him a stern look. "Naruto, I saw Natsuki finishing the picture. If it was yours, where were you?" Naruto tried to explain. "There was a cat in the yard, so I." Minato joined the conversation. "So you were playing outside with a cat. That's fine, so why do you insist on claiming your sister's work? If you're jealous, just draw something yourself. What you're doing can be called stealing, and you know our opinion on that." Naruto tried not to look too upset. "But, that's not how it." Kushina sighed. "Naruto, stop making excuses and just apologize for lying." "But I wasn't." Naruto started. Kushina gave him a stern look. "Naruto, go to your room. You won't be coming to Ichiraku's with us today. I didn't want to do this, but you brought this over yourself. It will give you time to think about if the punishment is worth telling us obvious lies." Naruto blinked. Why was he being punished? He was telling the truth. Natsuki stole his picture, lied to Mom and Dad, and as a reward, she gets to go to Ichiraku's while he had to stay in his room. That was like a thief stealing a painting, and being given the insurance money of the painting as a reward. He ran up to his room, slamming all doors that he could, sliding or solid. On the way up the stairs, he looked back one last time, and saw Natsuki stretching her tongue out to him. That was the first time Naruto truly hated his sister. Chapter 3. Naruto grunted as he was slammed against the ground. He quickly pushed himself on all fours and kicked his left leg behind him. A huff told him he hit the target. He jumped to his feet, but his attacker had already recovered. Naruto blocked 5 punches and sent 3 back, before a knee to the gut forced him on his knees. "That's enough, both of you." Minato's voice rang out. Natsuki jumped back, while Naruto struggled a bit before getting up. "Good job you two, especially you, Natsuki. I'm surprised, most girls are weaker than boys." Natsuki puffed her chest, while Naruto growled. "Well, most girls don't have a demon in them that make them stronger." Minato gave him a look. "Naruto, what? It's true. The blonde lady with the diamond on her forehead said so herself, remember?" Minato couldn't argue with that. He had asked if Tsunade could come over and check the children, to make sure there were no complications that could interfere with the beginning of their shinobi training. There had been nothing, a few unusual spots in Naruto, but nothing really troubling. However, Tsunade had discovered that the Kyuubi's chakra, minuscule amounts of it seeping into Natsuki, was strengthening her bones and muscles, making her stronger and tougher than the average boy her age. She had said that while Naruto and Natsuki had been present, although honestly speaking only Naruto had paid attention to her. "Yes, it's true, but that doesn't mean you should rub it in," Minato admitted. Naruto nodded. "Yes, it does, otherwise she'll treat it like a personal accomplishment." "Dad, be honest, if Natsuki was a normal girl, heck, if she was a normal boy, who would have won?" Minato sighed. "You Naruto, and don't swear. Natsuki, your brother has a point. In the entire spar, you never once dodged or blocked a single attack, you just took them and kept on striking, quickly forcing Naruto, who did dodge and block, into the defensive. Natsuki blinked. So, it didn't hurt and I still won. Minato looked at her. That's true, but this was a bare-handed spar. In real combat against experienced enemies, you'll almost always be fighting someone with a weapon, if only a kunai. And if you fight them the way you fought your brother, you'll be cut to ribbons before you can inflict any damage. Even the Kyuubi can't heal you if you have a knife in your chest or lost your head. Your strategy is just dashing out hits and relying on the fox to fix anything that happens to you. While that is okay now, it has to change. Your mother says that in sword training, Naruto beats you every time. Natsuki was insulted, only because mom always calls the matches before anything happens. Minato frowned. No, she calls the matches when one side gets a hit that would either cripple or kill them if you were using real swords. Naruto just uses openings to hit those places. Natsuki shook her head. Nah, she called matches when Naruto hit my shin or arms. Minato looked at her. Well, you can't fight without arms and feet, can you? Natsuki pouted, before finally admitting, no. Minato ruffled her hair. See, was that so hard? Natsuki's face clearly stated yes, but Minato didn't notice. Now, let's move on to jutsu practice. Natsuki's face brightened, while Naruto grimaced. Natsuki loved learning and using new jutsu, which she did incredibly fast, while Naruto always took longer. The secret of Natsuki's success of course once again lay in the fact that simply because the Kyuubi was sealed inside of her, Natsuki had unnaturally large chakra reserves. She could go on when Naruto had to take breaks, and more importantly, she could afford to use 5 times the chakra needed to get the jutsu to work, while Naruto had to work on his control to get it to work. Of course, that also meant that Naruto could stand and carefully move on liquid surfaces by now, while Natsuki was incapable of merely walking up a tree. While Natsuki was upset when she saw her brother walk over water or just walk up vertical surfaces to avoid her, she saw no need to better her control, as she had no problems doing the jutsu they were taught. Any attempts of Naruto to state otherwise were perceived as bullying, and his parents didn't take his side in those arguments either, going with the old line, any problem that I can safely ignore is not a problem, meaning that as long as Natsuki could do the jutsu, they were happy. To their parents' defense, he and his sister were 5, but Naruto still couldn't see what was wrong at pointing out a problem before it became a habit and even harder to correct. What Naruto loved were genjutsu. He discovered that with his good control, which he regularly practiced, and his very creative mind, they just came naturally to him. Kushina had taught them the basics, but with Natsuki unable to dispel even the most basic ones and endlessly complaining, she had, much to Naruto's chagrin, decided to drop genjutsu until they were a bit older and, in Natsuki's case, more mature. Naruto had been upset with the sudden loss of his passion as a lesson, and wandered the village for a few hours. By coincidence, he had met a member of the Kurama clan, who were known for their skills with genjutsu, and asked him for pointers. He had to invite the older boy to dango, something his savings still hadn't completely recovered from, but he had gotten his tip. In fact, that tip would be one of the biggest impacts in young Naruto's life. Genjutsu, the Kurama had said, is different from any other jutsu, no matter if taijutsu, ninjutsu, kenjutsu or fuinjutsu. You see, with all of those, you can easily learn from a master, and with talent, you may even surpass him using what he taught you. You may become a taijutsu master using only taijutsu you were taught by others, just as you can easily become a ninjutsu master using only jutsu that others created, as long as you have sufficient chakra, talent, affinity, and of course determination. Genjutsu, however, is fundamentally different. No matter how hard you work or how talented you are, you will never surpass your master using what he has taught you. Naruto had looked at him. Why not? The man had smiled. Simple. Genjutsu is a jutsu that relies on one's imagination to work. The hand signs are something used by beginners to upper mid-class, and they only serve the purpose of helping you focus. But those hand signs are something you use, they are unique to you. While a person who knows what the genjutsu is supposed to do can cast them with the hand signs, they in fact reduce the power of the genjutsu, as they distract from the true source, your imagination. True masters can cast a genjutsu with a single finger, a sound, a gesture, or even without any indication. Basically the genjutsu that work best for you, that are the most impressive and the hardest to break, are those that you yourself created. To put it bluntly, a beginner who designed his own jutsu may, and has, cast a better genjutsu than a master who uses something made by another. If you really want success with genjutsu, don't ask for hand signs or how to do the jutsu, ask for what it does and then work until you made one that does it. It requires more work, but the results are well worth the effort. Naruto blinked. This went against almost everything his mother had told him. But, aren't hand signs vital because they control the flow of chakra? So a genjutsu shouldn't work without precise chakra work, right? The Kurama had laughed. Indeed, and that is why those who work in the art of genjutsu need very good chakra control. The hand signs are only needed if your control is not good enough to move the chakra on your own. That's also why people with miserable control are unable to break genjutsu on their own. They have to disrupt their flow of chakra, although the higher level genjutsu can resist that, and those people don't have enough control to cause such a disruption within themselves. And you don't need hand signs, any focus will do. In fact, we have a girl in our clan, the most talented one we've seen in a very long time, and she uses pictures she draws as a focus instead of hand signs. Initially you may need a focus, but what that focus is really doesn't matter in genjutsu. For ninjutsu, it is important, because the hand signs are also connected with certain elements of nature and help you tune in better, but that's a different story. So Naruto had started working on creating his own genjutsu, testing them on animals and the harmless ones on random pedestrians. He had also started drawing again, although after Natsuki again took one of his pictures, a rough sketch of Konoha, while he wasn't looking and claimed it was hers, he had started to burn them as soon they were finished. There was another thing that fascinated Naruto, although that was even more difficult to learn. While alone in the house, Naruto had walked into his father's library. While Minato had installed seals that ensured nobody he didn't authorize could pull a scroll out of the drawer and that nobody could remove a scroll from the library, he also had the bad habit of leaving things laying around. Naruto discovered that seals, while immensely complex, were actually fairly simple in concept. There were certain rules and guidelines for seal work, which could be bended to a certain degree but not broken without dire consequences, and as long as you followed these, you actually had a lot of freedom in what you do. Of course Naruto would need a deep understanding of seals before he could do anything that was even a 50th as complicated as his father's Hiraishin, but the most basic things Naruto quickly learned to do, the entire concept of sealing somehow making complete sense to him. All in all, Naruto was by far superior in Genjutsu, Fuinjutsu and chakra control to Natsuki, while having a slight edge over her in Kenjutsu, due to the fact that he actually dodged and blocked. She was better in Taijutsu, although simply stronger and faster would be more accurate, and also superior in ninjutsu, thanks to Kyuubi's increased reserves. Her problems with control were avoided, and when it became clear that the way things were going, Natsuki would never be able to use a bunshin, they decided to teach her the Kage Bunshin, a jutsu perfect for people with high chakra and demons stopping information overload. Natsuki had taken to it like a fish to water, while Naruto had nearly killed himself when in a fit of jealousy, he had tried the jutsu in his room, managing 3 clones, which dispelled themselves to give Naruto back his chakra, as voluntary dispelled clones return everything excluding exhaustion to their creators. Naruto had learned his limit and the Kage Bunshin's secret there and then, and never created more than 2 clones tops, usually 1, who then trained chakra control or read available scrolls and books while he focused on Genjutsu, Fuinjutsu and physical fitness, in that order. Naruto had actually taken the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu apart, figured out what gave them their independent minds and abilities to send information, and combined the sentient mind with a type of Bunshin that had no physical body but didn't dispel when hit, creating a new jutsu with drastically reduced chakra costs. His Genzo Bunshin had the cost of a low D-ranked jutsu and took no more control than one needed to stick to a wall, yet nobody took him seriously when he presented it. They explained that it wouldn't do any good against an experienced shinobi, despite the fact that Naruto explained he had intended it to be for shinobi beginning their career, to which it would have been a very useful jutsu, since the clones were transparent to the caster, an unintended side effect. Naruto had even created another jutsu based on his first one, a C-ranked jutsu requiring a water-walking level of control, the Genzo Bunshin no Yoroi, but the only thing that Naruto got when he tried to present his work was the order to not use ninjutsu in a taijutsu match, although his father seemed happy that Naruto had started crafting jutsu, even if they currently were useless ones in his opinion. Natsuki spent most of the time she didn't train with her many friends, while Naruto, who after that story Natsuki had told on their birthday had become something of an outcast in his age group, something that Natsuki had started to actively encourage, spent most of his free time either perfecting his chakra control, coming up with seals, or working on genjutsu. While the simple ones Naruto could quickly recreate, he was working on one that would be much more complex. What he didn't know was how soon he would need it. It was a cold day in February. Naruto and Natsuki were now 6 and a certain rhythm had settled in their lives. On weekdays they would get up, get dressed, brush their teeth, and begin their exercises before they were tutored by their mother. After lunch at 1 p.m. they had free time until 7 p.m., when dinner was served. Then their father would be home and they would go through 1.5 more hours of training before the day was done and the siblings would wash, spend time with the family and go to bed. On weekends they had free and could decide whether they wanted to train, study, play, or just hang around. Minato worked Saturdays and parts of Sunday, while Kushina spent every second weekend with friends, leaving the children unsupervised. On one particular Saturday, Naruto and Natsuki were alone in the house, having just returned from shopping, Kushina going back because she had forgot to buy an important dinner ingredient, when it happened. Naruto and Natsuki were in the kitchen, unpacking the shopping bags, when they heard a swooshing sound. Both spending enough time throwing kunai to recognize the sound of one cutting through the air, they both jumped off the chairs they had used to reach the higher drawers. 2 kunai embedded themselves in the wall where their necks had been only seconds before. They turned around, only to see a man wearing a headband with rocks carved into it. Natsuki summoned a small army of clones, confident that would be enough, only to stare in shock as the man made short work of them. That shock cost her, as she froze, and only Naruto pulling on her arm to get her to run turned the third thrown kunai into a grazing shot instead of a kill. Naruto knew they only had as long as it would take the man to destroy the rest of the clones, which would probably be in roughly 20 seconds if the regular puffs sounding out of the kitchen were any indication. A nice part of the cage bunshin was that the clones, knowing what they were a lot braver than the originals and had no problem starting kamikaze attacks, which bought them a little time. Naruto's goal was to reach the front door, then the gate, and then they would almost be out of the woods, as there was always some shinobi on the road, usually more than one, and every chunin knew jutsu that served to call for backup. He actually managed to leave the house before the Iwa nin caught up with them. Natsuki, who had been little more than dead weight the entire escape, cried out in pain when a shuriken sank into her calf. She noticed that her surroundings were getting blurry. She wondered if she was poisoned. Naruto knew there was no way he'd make it, even if he left his sister behind. He formed a few hand signs and prayed to every deity that might be listening for this to work. Then he saw that the Iwa nin had drawn a tanto and was swinging it down. Naruto's eyes widened in horror. He knew he wouldn't be able to dodge in time. Jin Nadare, Jonin of Iwa and former member of its Hunter Nin, saw the boy beginning hand signs, and decided that whatever he was planning, he was not going to finish it. He drew his tanto and swung it downward. It cut through flesh and bone, leaving a deep diagonal gash from left collarbone to right hip. The boy didn't look like he was in pain, it was more disbelieving shock. Even though Jin hated the Yondaime with a passion, the man killing his father, mother and 3 older siblings, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity for this kid, who probably couldn't understand what was happening. Nothing personal, kid. This aims for your father. The pain will end in a second. With that, he slashed the boy's throat, the blonde kid collapsing in a gurgling heap. The girl had tried to open the gate, but Jin's tanto pierced her heart before she managed to pull it open. Jin removed the blade and, just to be sure, slashed her head off with a single strike. He was blown back by a chakra wave that burned on the skin, but apart from that he was fine. He opened the gate and began to run, knowing he had only seconds until the burst of chakra would alarm somebody. Getting out of Konoha was fairly easy, as the commotion had left every shinobi on duty confused. However, 10 minutes into his escape, he realized that he had pursuers. They had come faster than he would have liked, but realistically speaking, he had more head start than he himself had expected, and he had prepared traps the entire route back to Iowa, ranging from exploding tag arrays to camouflaged seals that would fire poisoned Senbon at those tracking him, not to mention a few safe hiding places. Maybe 20 minutes had passed, and the Konoha nin had been steadily gaining on him. By now, he could actually see flashes of them. There was no Hyuga, which was a huge relief because it meant he could use 20 hiding places that a Hyuga would have immediately spotted him in. The Inazua and Aburame were worrisome, and Jin had gained multiple cuts and grazes from projectiles aimed at him. He didn't give up though, because he knew they were nearing the first trap, a simple array of 10 exploding tags. It would be triggered in just a few. Boom! Such a satisfying sound, especially when accompanied by the screams of the dying. Even Deidara would not have been able to beat that. While he wasn't stupid enough to go look what he hit, a rough headcount did show that only 15 of the former 40-headed squad were still on his trail. While his route led him towards Kusa, the traps slowly dwindled his pursuers' numbers, although they had gotten more careful after that first explosion. When he put his biggest plan into motion, he had gained more ground, with maybe 7 followers left. He reached the river and started to run over it, suddenly making an 88-degree turn to the right, jumping into a prepared hole in the muddy shore and closing it seconds before his pursuers reached the river and ran across. There was a short pause while the trackers searched for his scent, until they started running off in the opposite direction. Jin had walked that route 100 times to make sure his scent was on the trail. It led to a clearing, where a rain of poisoned Senbon would go down on them. He had left a communicator there so he could hear when they reached the clearing, determined he would not crawl out until they had reached it. Then the relieving rustling of feet rang through his headset, and Jin bolted, running on the river for a few seconds before running towards Taki to reach Iowa. The hunt had gone on for 2 days now, and Jin was starting to use chakra pills and concentrated caffeine tablets to keep moving. He listened to the voices in the communicator, smiling at what he heard. At first only angry calls, then surprised cries when the Senbon fired. One particular piece of information made him grin and gulp at the same time. Kushina-sama, damn it, she's down. Where are the medics? They went down in that first explosion. Damn it, you two, bring Kushina-sama to Tsunade-sama at once. You two, come with me. We're gonna get that motherfucking bastard for this. Inuzuka, do you still got his trail? I think he tricked us. The tracks are not as fresh as they should be. He lost us at the river. Jin kicked into a higher gear. Kushina Uzumaki, the Red Death, Uzu's Crimson Whirlpool, had been hunting him. His escape was a miracle. However, she was hit by the Senbon, and from the way it sounded, a lot of Senbon, each of them dipped in a poison that killed in less than an hour. They would never make it back to Konoha in time. Getting rid of the last 3 had been comparably simple. He had led them into a trap that, while not fatal, covered them in a substance similar to fresh skunk juice. They would never be able to track him now, meaning that with the last few traps and maneuvers to lose them, he was free as a bird. He headed straight for Iowa, reaching it 4 days after he had left Konoha. His welcome was a national hero's. The Tsuchikage, a firm hater of Konoha, welcomed him in all honors. Shortly after, Iowa received the news that Kushina Uzumaki had passed away, and that the Yondaime had committed suicide after the loss of his entire family, and the ecstatic leader named Jin his successor. While beaming with pride, the greatest reward was the adoration of the female gender. After a hot night with 3 gorgeous women, Jin finally fell into well-deserved slumber. Konoha was in an uproar. How had this happened? An assailant from Iowa had sneaked into the Namikaze compound while the adults were absent and attacked the children. Namikaze compound. How did he even get in? A dog-masked Anbu asked while looking at the 2 unmoving bodies of the children. The bastard had got them good. A tiger-masked rookie spoke up. Hokage-sama suspected that he sneaked in when Kushina-sama left the compound to get the groceries she forgot. He immediately changed the seals, but the damage is done. Inu nodded. So, what happened to him? Tora shrugged, while the children started to stir. A high-class genjutsu. Ibiki had a bit of trouble getting him out of it. He said the man actually fought to stay in it. Must have been some dream. Not that I blame him. I'd want to stay any place where I'm not Ibiki's new toy. Kushina spoke up. So who put him under it? Minato shrugged. That's the big question, isn't it? The Kurama clan stated that as much as they'd like to take credit, none of their members were outside of their compound at the time in question, and while we have some who are good in Genjutsu, Itachi here being one of the first to come to mind, they all say they had nothing to do with it, nor do they have any idea of what was used. It was either forgotten, customized, or self-made. Kushina's eyes wandered to Naruto and Natsuki. You don't think one of them? Itachi seemed thoughtful. It's possible, but if so, then we have a Genjutsu prodigy on our hands. Inu seemed more hesitant. I don't know. Of course geniuses like Itachi here exist, but they usually get noticed. A Genjutsu prodigy especially, as they have to try their jutsu out on people, in contrast to ninjutsu or taijutsu prodigies, who can train alone with nobody watching. Itachi nodded. True, Genjutsu users need to practice on others, but that doesn't necessarily mean they get noticed. If the jutsu is subtle enough, the person may not even know he's under a Genjutsu. The attacker, who is the insignia of a Jonin, would have been able to free himself from the Genjutsu. The jutsu must have been so subtle he didn't notice he was put under it, working with his logic to make sure that he didn't realize he was caught, and pleasant enough for him not to try and dispel it out of sheer desperation. Also, some minor injuries must have been ingrained, as he has a few wounds that would have dispelled a Genjutsu that shows the mind no reason to why there is an injury. The jutsu would have to be at least a B rank, maybe A rank to have all these effects. Kushina shook her head, but neither one received such training. I taught one really low-rank Genjutsu, then I had to stop because Natsuki was getting more and more upset because she couldn't do it. Naruto did learn it fairly quickly, but there are only few scrolls about Genjutsu in the compound, and those are never pulled out. Neither Naruto nor Natsuki had any source on Genjutsu, so it couldn't have been them. Inu looked at Natsuki. Do you think it could have been the fox? Minato thought about it. Well, Kitsune are known as tricksters and masters of illusion. Of course, we never heard of Kyuubi having any Genjutsu skills, but it could be that the fox simply never found itself in a situation where it would need to use them. That seems to be the only explanation. Itachi was not convinced. Wouldn't that mean that there should be at least some traces? Yuki residue for one. There are sections in Konoha that we still can't even approach because the stuff still lingering in said sections is so dense and aggressive to living beings, like us. 5% of Konoha have been deemed uninhabitable after the attack, and they still are, after all these years. And you're telling me the fresher trails vanished in minutes. Do you have a different explanation? Kushina asked. None so far, Itachi admitted. Still, I can't help but think that something we don't know happened here. Minato shrugged. And I agree, but if what you said is true, even the Iwa Nin won't be able to help us with that, as he would not know at which point his memories are a Genjutsu. Naruto was seething in anger. He had worked months on that one Genjutsu, making sure it worked just the way he wanted to, so that he could finally show something unique to him that his parents could be proud of, and now that he had actually activated Zeko Sakai, driving himself to chakra exhaustion while doing so, his sister of all people got the credit. It was not fair, and of course Natsuki didn't deny anything, granted, she didn't know better. But now she walked around with her head even more bloated, actually threatening him to put him under her super awesome Genjutsu if he didn't do what she wanted. Naruto had laughed her in the face, only to be punished when his sister started crying and telling Kushina he was making fun of her. Why did Natsuki get the credit for everything he worked for all the time, while he was being called jealous whenever he tried to set things straight? Even worse, Natsuki had found out that their parents and the teachers in the ninja academy they had recently started to visit didn't trust Naruto when his and her words stood against each other, especially if she had witnesses. So she had started to play pranks, and blamed him. And of course the other children took her side, claiming they saw Naruto do it. Some other pranksters like Kiba Inuzuka had started to do the same thing, meaning that Naruto was slowly gaining a reputation as a troublemaker, despite not doing anything wrong. It went so far that Naruto considered actually playing a prank on somebody, only so that their parents would, just for a change, yell at him for something he actually did. He was sick of hearing, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" resulting in him once yelling back, "Because I don't want to blame others for what I did or take credit for their actions," which had resulted in a week of house arrest. Really, life sucked. What Naruto didn't know was that life was about to take another U-turn on his 7th birthday, and not for the better. Chapter 4. Minato and Kushina were peacefully sleeping in their bed, an actual Western bed instead of a mere futon, when their instinct woke them, telling them they were no longer alone. The worry was instantly gone when they recognized Natsuki's steps, before she jumped on them both. "Oof," Minato called, exaggerating the pain Natsuki caused. When he opened his eyes, he saw she was already completely dressed in clothes and thick jacket, as winter had come early this year. The only thing she wasn't wearing were her shoes, as it was not allowed to wear those in the house. She smiled at him and Kushina, and jumped up and down on the bed. "Come on, wake up, it's almost 9, I wanna see my friends. Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go." Minato laughed. Okay, we're getting up." Kushina looked at her daughter. "Don't you want to open your presents first?" Natsuki shook her head. I can open them later, they don't go anywhere. I wanna see my friends." Minato and Kushina shrugged and got dressed, Natsuki jumping around like a rubber ball on a sugar rush, speaking without a single pause, urging her parents to hurry up, before literally dragging the laughing adults outside, still speaking without break. Meanwhile, Naruto blinked as he stood up. He had really gone overboard last night. He had read through a number of scrolls that the blonde woman with the diamond on her forehead had forgotten there, with a dictionary and an encyclopedia for some of the more complicated words, and found a few things that had brought him to put down the basis for 2 new genjutsu that would be as good or even better as Zeko Sakai. It would probably take months until they were done, but his first self-made genjutsu had given him a feeling for how it worked and what he had to do, so he was confident that he could finish these new ones faster. After he had those ideas somewhat worked out, he had worked on some seals, before falling asleep at 3 in the morning. Then all he would have to do was get his reserves up to a level where performing them would not be a gamble that always left him unconscious and only worked once every 5 tries. Naruto had wisely decided to try his genjutsu one more time, just to be sure, and was disgruntled to learn that he didn't have enough chakra for it, and that the first time had probably been a fluke caused by adrenaline increasing the amount of chakra in his body to beyond what was normal and safe. Of course, by now he could do it without fainting, but it was extremely draining, plus the entire affair had practically been forgotten already. Still, he was proud with himself, and that he kept pushing his limits to surpass them seemed to be working. He knew he should have taken it a bit easier on the day before his birthday, but it had been so fascinating. And it seemed he was still the first one up, as he couldn't hear any sound, not counting the chirping of birds, the swooshing of leaves in the trees, the slamming of the front door, Wait, what? Naruto looked out his window, and his heart ached at the sight. He saw his parents, happily laughing with Natsuki, who was holding their hands and using them as a swing, laughing and talking without rest. At that moment, Naruto was no longer the Genjutsu and Fuinjutsu prodigy. He was no longer the genius that had outmaneuvered a Jonin. He was simply a recently 7-year-old child that had seen his parents go away without him. He didn't even get the idea to open the window and call out to them. Instead he jumped out of the bed, and ran, barefoot and only in his thin pajamas, down the stairs in the opposite end of the building into the front door, the gate to the compound slamming shut the moment he opened the door. Naruto ran as fast as he could, intending to beat on the door to gain his parents' attention. He stretched out his left hand to catch the speed and absorb the impact so that he didn't slam face first into the door, the other hand balled to a fist and ready to slam against the gate. However, luck was not on Naruto's side today. In fact, Naruto's luck had taken the day off, while misfortune was working double shifts to catch up with the workload. The moment Naruto's left hand touched the gate happened to be the exact moment Minato activated the seals in the gate. The first seals went up without a problem, including the sound-blocking seal, which ensured that nobody outside could hear what happened inside. That seal had been placed there back when Naruto and Natsuki had been babies and latter had regularly cried the whole neighborhood awake. Minato had added them to ensure that at least the neighbors got some sleep. However, as bad luck would have it, Naruto's fingers were touching a number of powerful yet for the naked eye invisible seals that should not be connected. Those seals used Naruto's chakra pathways, apparently believing them to be mere extensions of the array. However, The influx came from all sides and was simply more than the human body was designed to take. Blood splashed, hitting doorway and ceiling as Naruto's skin ripped open in multiple places. He screamed as he felt the pulse of chakra destroy his muscles and crushed the bones in his hand. Then he was blasted backwards, landing on the lawn, his arm little more than a bag of flesh, bone fragments and, unfortunately for Naruto, pain receptors. Through some evil miracle, those had remained relatively intact, and were sending Naruto's brain the information that he was in agony. Minato glanced at his gate with a frown. "What's wrong, honey?" his wife asked. Minato looked at her. "I thought I felt a surge from the gate. I'll have to check the seals when we get back. I don't want them malfunctioning when we need them the most." Kushina nodded, before Natsuki called the attention back to her. "Later, Dad, now we're going to Hinata's." Minato nodded. "Of course we are, Natsuki. The gate's not going anywhere." With that, he turned and left, still a bit concerned about that surge. Then his wife kissed him, and he forgot everything. Natsuki gagged, earning her a playful smack to the back of the head. Every twitch, the slightest movement, everything sent waves of unbearable pain through his body. Naruto had tried to stay as still as possible while calling for help, but after a minute of shouting and whimpering, he realized that he was wasting his breath, as he recalled that there were silencing seals on the walls and gate. Nobody would hear him. He looked at his arm, and immediately looked away. It looked bad, and it was still bleeding profoundly. Naruto knew he'd be in trouble if he didn't stop the bleeding, so he tried to stand up. It took 3 tries, but with inhuman willpower, he fought himself to his feet, and turned to the house, going for the bandages. The door was closed. Naruto cursed as he tried to open it, but the door stayed stubborn. What Naruto couldn't have known was that when the gate was sealed shut, the house automatically went into lockdown. All doors and windows closed and were impossible to open until the gate was opened, unless they were opened from the inside. Naruto had left the door open in his rush to reach his parents, and now that it shut, there was nobody in the house to let him back in. Which meant no bandages, no medicine, no food, and what would get a problem later, no warm clothing. Naruto wasted another 15 minutes circling the house, looking for any opening that would grant him access. After finally accepting he was locked out, Naruto decided to improvise. "Uargh!" he cried as he took off his shirt, his arm sending agony through his body every time the shirt even so much as grazed it. The left sleeve had been obliterated when his arm burst, so Naruto bit into the right shoulder and tore off the sleeve, before, with cries of pain, tied it tightly around his arm like a rope to restrict the blood flow in that area. Then he, with great suffering, tightly wrapped the rest of the shirt around the bleeding arm as a makeshift bandage. The scroll he had read yesterday had said that these measures should be taken as soon as possible, and that they had saved lives in the past. Also, it had said something about limbs falling asleep with restricted blood flow, meaning that he would no longer feel the limb in question. Which was good, as right now, Naruto really didn't want to feel his arm. Naruto shivered. Without his shirt, he really felt how cold the day really was, but if he stayed in the sun, he'd be fine. All he had to do was wait just a little time, then his parents would be there to save him. Everything would be fine. Minato sighed. He had been looking forward to a fairly quiet day, chatting with old friends about this and that and sipping on some drinks, but it was not to be. The Chunin exams were coming up, and Minato had failed to see the consequences for the clan compounds. The outside was being used for training, and the entire ground was covered with kunai, shuriken and the Odsenbon, meaning that the children had to stay and play inside. As in where they were, Minato and the other parents had to permanently keep an eye on their children, and with every compound the group progressed, it was getting more hectic. In fact, things were so hectic that it was by sheer coincidence that he had met back up with his wife. She gave him a strained smile. "They're quite a handful, aren't they? I can't remember any time in the war when I was this stressed," she said. Minato laughed, before frowning. "Me neither, but I can't shake this odd feeling I'm having. Like I've forgotten something important." Kushina nodded. "You too, it's on the tip of my tongue, but I just can't." "Natsuki Uzumaki Namikaze, put that down this instant." Said girl pouted, but she obediently placed the jar with the powdered antlers back on the shelf where she got them. Kushina followed her, while Minato turned to his old friend and current host, Shikaku Nara. "I'm really sorry. She's too hyper." Shikaku waved him off. "Don't worry about it. All the delicate and expensive stuff is sealed where they can't find it." Minato nodded and went in the opposite direction his wife had headed. There were already 6 children running around, including Shikaku's own child who was being dragged by a blonde Ino Yamanaka. Natsuki's presence had to be sealed in a scroll by now when not used, and Minato really wished for a break. The first thing he'd do when they were finally at the actual festival and everyone looked over the kids was getting dead drunk. Still, the odd feeling never left him, but Minato was kept busy by the steadily growing horde of kids, so he shoved the feeling aside, accrediting it to the surge in his gait, opting to take a look when they were back. The bitter irony was that he was partially right. Naruto whimpered. The sun had traveled further, and out of the sun, coldness crept forwards within the shadows. He could faintly see his own breath, and that was bad. He again fought himself to his feet, and gracelessly stumbled to the south wall, using his right hand to support himself on the wall, despite the inconvenience. He felt miserable. For some reason, the wounds were still bleeding, as the torn shirt on his arm still hadn't dried. Even worse, his arm refused to fall asleep, sending agony with every motion. But all moaning wouldn't help him get warm, so he stubbornly set one foot in front of the other, before leaning against the south wall and slowly sliding to the ground. For a while he distracted himself by going over calculations for Genjutsu and seals, but the more time passed, the harder it became to focus. He realized he might be in trouble when he noticed that he had to concentrate to multiply 5 meters and 7 meters to get the area of effect for a rectangular 4-point barrier in Moss squared. He understood that the loss of blood was slowly becoming a problem, his first aid being meant as exactly that, first aid to prepare for the actual medics to do their magic, and was slowly failing in keeping him up. His vision had also started to become slightly blurry. Naruto's mind slowly shut down, the higher brain functions slowly ceasing to conserve energy. He had crawled to the west wall, so that when his parents came in a few minutes at most, they would see him more easily. And while his mind dimmed more and more, one thought went through Naruto's mind again and again. It was the same thought that had kept him alive and awake up till now. "Mom and Dad will be here soon. They'll come for you, Naruto. You just have to hang in there for just a little bit longer." He didn't even notice when the sun vanished behind the horizon and a light snow began to fall. Minato sighed. Even directly after the Kyuubi attack, when 7 meetings a day had been considered little work, he had not been so stressed out. These kids had sheer limitless energy, and with every house they visited, it only got worse. The horde of children grew, while the adults opted to stay at home, reuniting with their offspring at the Kyuubi festival, to which they were currently heading. He already knew what he would do when he finally could take his eyes off that small army of chaos, namely getting shit drunk. He suspected that having to watch all those children alone was some sick punishment the clan heads were subjecting him to because they were unhappy with certain decisions with the council, although he couldn't think of one that would warrant such draconian measures. Finally the many stands of the festival came into view, the setting sun shining through a hole in the clouds, letting the falling snow glow in a magical light. It was a sight that really lifted the spirits with its beauty. He put an arm around Kushina, both smiling, until the sound of gagging reminded him of the little plagues. He looked at them. "Well, what are you waiting for? Go have fun." They were gone before the words had faded away in the noise of the slowly growing crowd. Minato pumped his fist. "Freedom, Sake, here we come." Kushina shook her head, but she followed him to the stand where a few of their friends were already waving at them. The rest of the evening belonged strictly to the adults, and nothing that even faintly involved someone below 15 would be mentioned, unless the person in question was a stranger to most or a shinobi that could be embarrassed with stories about old times. Life was good. The entire world had become nothing but a dark blur. The silence was deafening, only his weak breathing cutting through the absolute quiet. Everything was so cold. Naruto couldn't see it, but the snow falling on him had gradually stopped melting, his legs and shoulders now looking whitish, while a white cap seemed to have formed on his head. His body was already too weak and exhausted to shiver. And still one thought kept Naruto clinging to life, even as his body was slowly shutting down. "They'll be here shortly. Hang on. Just a little bit longer." Natsuki was sitting on her father's lap, rocking back and forth. She had had a lot of fun at the festival so far, playing the games like ring tossing, which was completely different from her shuriken training, or catching goldfish she could then keep as pets. And the food was great. Of course nothing beat Ichiraku's, but the cotton candy, sugar-roasted almonds and all the other sweets had come close. Now they were sitting under umbrellas, waiting for the real highlight, the fireworks. The festival was great, but seeing the sky illuminated by 1,000 colors was always the best thing. If only she weren't so tired. It was long past her bedtime, but since the academy was nice enough to give the day after the festival off as well, the children could stay up and watch the fireworks without being zombies in the class the following morning. Natsuki smiled, as she chatted with her friends, who were sitting around them with their respective parents. Her dad smelled a little like sake, but it was okay. She looked at him. "Dad, how long until the fireworks? How long? How long? How long? How long?" Minato smiled. In 5, 4, the entire crowd had started to join the count. 3, 2, 1, boom. The fireworks had begun, exactly at the time Minato had sealed the beast, midnight. Everyone laughed, cheered and congratulated each other. Everyone except for one. The booming and the sudden eruptions of color in the blur of Naruto's vision had pulled Naruto out of his trance. Although he could not see the fireworks blooming in the sky like giant flowers, his mind instinctively knew what it was. It was midnight. His birthday was over. His body shivered, snow falling off his weakly twitching head and shoulders. He was much too weak to laugh, but hollow chuckles escaped his lips as he understood. They forgot me. They forgot I existed. He knew that his parents had occasionally forgotten about him for moments when stressed, probably because Naruto had somehow gained the ability to merge with the background and become invisible, not to mention that Natsuki hogged and hoarded all available attention like a miser hoarded money, but he had never thought it was this bad. For the first time since he woke up, Naruto cried. The fireworks had lasted almost half an hour, but now they were over. Minato looked at his daughter. "Well, Natsuki, time to leave." His daughter pouted. "Do we have to?" She caught her mother's look, and quickly added, "Just asking." Suddenly a poof rang through the air and a giant toad appeared, a white-haired man riding it. "Jiraiya the Toad Sage has arrived," he called, and the parents quickly sheathed the weapons they had instinctively drawn. "Uncle Jiraiya," Natsuki shouted, jumping at the man who sometimes visited and always told her funny stories. Minato smiled. "You're back in town, sensei. Looks like I have to reinforce the guards around the hot springs." "So, how long have you been here?" Jiraiya laughed. "Just arrived. I couldn't very well just pass Konoha without giving Natsuki here her birthday present." Natsuki looked up with sparkling eyes. "You have something for me." He ruffled her hair. "Of course I do. Who do you think I am?" "An uncorrectable pervert," Kushina answered. Jiraiya clutched his chest in mock pain. "You wound me, Kushina. However, since I smell the alcohol on you both, I'll let it slide." Natsuki was impatiently pulling on his leg. "So, what's my present?" Jiraiya puffed his chest. "Well, your parents told me that you have incredible chakra reserves, so I will grant you the honor, the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to sign the Toad contract." Natsuki's eyes widened, then she jumped up and down in joy. "Yay, I get to be just like Daddy." Jiraiya shook his head, summoned the toad that held the contract and unrolled it. "Now Natsuki, a summoning contract is special. You have to sign your name, yes, your full name, with your blood, and then leave a handprint in blood. Then you get to summon toads, just like me and your father." Natsuki had frowned when she heard she had to sign with her own blood, but she quickly got over it and cut open her hand to write in blood. Once she finished, she looked at Jiraiya. "How do I summon?" Jiraiya smirked. "Now that is for your father to tell you. He'll decide when you're ready for it." Natsuki pouted. "No fair," she shouted, but she ran off to brag to her friends. Jiraiya laughed again, before looking around. Well, Natsuki got her present. So, where is the other one? The quiet little blonde. All color drained from Kushina and Minato's faces. "Naruto," Kushina whispered. "We left him at home. He probably destroyed the house by now." Minato tried to joke, but his face told of his shock. Jiraiya blinked. "What do you mean, you left him alone?" I heard that he seems to be a troublemaker, but don't you think it's a little cruel to punish him on his birthday? Kushina shook her head. We didn't punish him, we forgot. Jiraiya blinked. He didn't believe his ears. You forgot your own son. On his birthday. Minato seemed completely disturbed by himself. When we woke up. Natsuki. So much chaos. Had to look everywhere at once. There was never a moment's quiet. Ah shit. He turned towards the compound, Kushina having retrieved Natsuki in the meantime, and together they ran to the Namikaze compound. Minato had somewhat regained his cool by then. He looked at Kushina. Well, what will we give as an excuse? Kushina smiled weakly. He probably won't forgive us this until he graduates. We have to make it up to him somehow. Minato chuckled, although it sounded a bit strained. How about we don't punish for demolishing the house, which he has likely done by now? Kushina sent him a stern look. I'm serious, Minato. He's going to be terribly upset, and he has every right to be. How could we forget him? Now Minato sobered. I don't know. We woke up, still half asleep, and Natsuki practically dragged us out the front door into her friends, the most exhausting because Hyper one's first. We never had a real moment's peace until the festival, and at that point, we wanted and did knowingly forget the fact that children even existed. It's not really an excuse, but nobody else mentioned him before Jiraiya. Kushina frowned. Naruto acts so shy, he always stays in the background. Even though he's there, he doesn't act like he's there. I don't think he has many friends. None of the children even asked where Naruto was. Doesn't that make you worry? Minato nodded. He was about to say more, but they had reached the gate. Minato looked at it, slightly worried. His instincts told him that he didn't want to see what was behind that gate. He had had that feeling before, and the room he had entered then had been plastered with exploding notes. Jiraiya noticed his hesitation. What's wrong? Stealing yourself for the sight of the ruins of your house? Or are you worried that he might have booby-trapped the gate? Minato shook his head. No, well, that too, but I'm getting a bad vibe. And I just remembered that there seemed to have been a slight surge in the gate when I closed it this morning. But, let's go in. Kai. The seals glowed, and Minato got a short report. No windows or doors were opened during the duration of lockdown. Apparently Naruto had decided to let out his anger indoors. He opened the gate, and fell into panic before he even looked inside. Jiraiya had smelled the breeze the moment the compound was no longer hermetically sealed, and immediately rendered Natsuki unconscious. Something was very wrong, if the coppery smell of blood was any indication, and he didn't think Natsuki should see whatever it was. Kushina gagged at the smell, before rushing through the gate. It took all her effort not to scream. There were bloody handprints, just the size of a 7-year-old's hands, going from the front door, which seemed to have a number of scratches, where someone had apparently tried to open it. The prints made a trail on the wall leading around the compound. Kushina rushed off, while Minato stared in shock. No door opened, no window opened. They all close in lockdown and can't be opened from the outside. The gate can't be opened, period. But where did all the blood come from? Jiraiya looked around. He noticed the scratches on the inside of the main gate, and he saw the splatters of blood on the frame. Minato, look at this. There's blood on the frame, even the ceiling. You said there was a surge on the gate. Could it be he touched the seals when you activated them? Minato looked at his former teacher, his mind apparently still unable to puzzle together what was going on. But, it's possible, but then. A heartbreaking scream interrupted them, coming from the left side of the house. Minato and Jiraiya dashed, the latter taking note that the ground beneath the oddly reddish-brown snow was sticky. Kushina was holding her child, which she had found leaning on the west wall of the compound. He had, according to the blood on the wall, including larger stains where he had rested, apparently gone with the sunlight to stay warm. While that was an admirable show of strength, when she had found him, Naruto had been draped in a thin sheet of white. His eyes were dull and unfocused, tears leaving their marks on the inhumanly pale skin. Kushina wailed, holding her son, rocking back and forth. When her husband arrived, she looked up. Nameless terror was etched on his face. Kami in heaven, have mercy, he whispered. Jiraiya looked between the two of them, before loudly clapping his hands. What are you two doing? We have to get him to Tsunade, now. Jiraiya himself was the most upset one of them all. Admittedly, his contact with the boy, now that he thought about it, had been non-existent, but he could honestly say that he had no fault in what happened to the boy. He had been the one, and shamefully for all clans that were visited, the first and only one, to ask about Naruto's whereabouts, although if he was honest, he only remembered when he had let Natsuki sign the contract, not wanting to look like he preferred a sibling to the other. When they arrived at the hospital, where Tsunade always resided in such situations, because there was always someone, usually a 2 to 3 digit number of someones, who drank more than they could stomach, said blonde dropped a glass she had been holding, letting it shatter on the floor. What the hell did you do with the kid? She asked, enraged. She glared at Jiraiya. If you had anything to do with this. Said man quickly raised his hands in defense. I had no part in it. I just got here 10 minutes ago. Kushina, still clutching her lifeless son, looked at Tsunade. I beg of you, save my son. Tsunade looked at her. I want an explanation later. She moved a chakra-covered hand to Naruto's head, then to his chest, after prying him out of Kushina's arms and putting him on a stretcher with attached mobile table. Don't ask me how, but he's still alive. She tore open the jacket wrapped around Naruto's arm, not that it could be identified as such, and her eyes widened. Dear Kami. She muttered, before her eyes widened. His heartbeat's fading. We're losing him. She placed her hands on the boy's chest, sending weak bursts of lightning chakra to keep the heart going, before looking at the nearest doctor. Prep me a room ASAP. He won't last much longer. The man nodded and ran, Tsunade and a squad of medics attracted by the commotion rolling Naruto after him. His parents and Jiraiya were not allowed beyond the reception. After nearly 10 hours of surgery, both shinobi style and old-fashioned, Tsunade returned to the waiting parents. Jiraiya had gone and parked Natsuki at the Yamanaka household, stating that a private emergency made it impossible for Natsuki to stay at the Namikaze compound for a day or two. That was actually true, and he had left before any questions could be asked. Kushina jumped up and rushed to the blonde woman. How is he? Please Tsunade, tell me he's okay. Tsunade snorted. He's far from okay. But fine, I'll fill you in on the details before I demand my explanation about what happened. She took a deep breath. He was heavily injured, to be more precise his left arm was, nearly bled dry and suffering from hypothermia to a ridiculous extent. In his limbs, the body temperature was just barely above freezing, the surface temperature of his skin in some cases even below freezing. By all rights and every medical text in the history of mankind, the boy should be dead, but we've stabilized him. What was one of the reasons for his heavy blood loss was that some foreign chakra was stuck in the wounds and prevented the blood from clotting. The boy will live, and surprisingly, there is no damage to his brain. That's where the good news ends. Minato, who had slumped together in relief, looked at her. Why, there is no mental damage as you say, and knowing you, he'll make a full recovery. You've fixed worse. Tsunade shook her head. No, I haven't. And I said there was no brain damage. There will probably be tons of mental damage. The wounds had been open for hours as far as I could tell, and the boy must have been conscious to cling to life for that long. So I can honestly say he'll never be the same again. Kushina bit her lip. Can't we remove the traumatizing memory? Tsunade shook her head, not without altering his entire mind. This will leave physical changes, and looking at those will make him wonder where he got them, which will destroy any block we put up in short time. Unless you want to alter every memory in his head to make him think he's always been like that, it's useless. And even then, there's no guarantee it'll actually hold, as we can't delete memories, only suppress them. Minato looked at her. What physical changes? Tsunade let out a deep sigh. His career as a shinobi is almost certainly over. Jiraiya looked up. Why? Tsunade looked at him. Had you brought the boy in immediately, or at least 1 or 2 hours ago, I probably would have been able to get him back to an almost completely functioning condition. But when you brought him, I had to choose between saving his arm and saving his life. Minato paled. What do you mean? Tsunade gave him a stern look. Whatever happened to his arm, it was bad. The bones in his hand up to the elbow are completely shattered. All muscles are shredded, most blood vessels heavily damaged. Also, since the boy restricted the blood circulation to that arm, Something that saved his life. A lot of tissue has simply died. What the boy did was obviously only supposed to last for a few minutes, an hour at most. All in all, that arm is little more than grinded meat with splinters. The skin had multiple large tears, so the arm lost mass. All that I can probably fix in a week or so. However, the real damage was done to his chakra coils. Jiraiya looked at her, no shred of his usual cheerfulness in his eyes. Damage to the coils was always bad. Those were the lifeline of a shinobi, and if there was something wrong, especially in such a vital area as the hand, the shinobi in question was a sitting duck, unable to use any jutsu requiring hand signs. How bad is it? Tsunade looked away. They are completely shattered all the way up to the shoulder. Those can't be fixed, and even if by some miracle they do regrow, it will be severely crippled. His left arm will never again mold chakra. Also, the nerves responsible for movement were also damaged. It is almost certain that he will never again be able to move his left arm properly. She gave a stern look to all three, who shrank under her glare. Whatever you did, it left Naruto a cripple. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.